The Tom Woods Show, episode 2255.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Hey, everybody, we all know it is time for us to break up, but everybody's status quo bias is standing in the way of this obvious and humane solution. Check out my brand new ebook called National Divorce: The Peaceful Solution to Irreconcilable Differences, which you can get for free at nationaldivorce.com. Hey, everybody, Tom Woods here. I've got two guests for you today. Chris Cofer, who is the director of a documentary film you may have seen, which I recommended to you folks, and which I myself may in fact have starred in, and that is The Monopoly on Violence. He's got a brand new one called Overpoliced, which we're going to talk about today. We're joined also by Pete Quinones of the Pete Quinones Show, and formerly Free Man Beyond the Wall, another prolific content creator. Gosh, I hate that term. Don't you hate that? Content creator just sounds like some made-up BS title we all have, right? Anyway, welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me, Tom.
All right, so what exactly is the role that each of you played in this, just so I know how to pitch the questions?
Well, Chris did pretty much everything for this one. My input was helping fundraise and then wrote a bunch of questions. So you could say that I'm executive producer and writer, and Chris is executive producer and director. And did you do any editing, Chris?
No, I had DJ Remark, one of our fellow ANCAPs, did that. He did a great job. And he and I are actually working on other projects in the future because of this.
Well, it's very rare for me to feature people who worked on a documentary that hasn't been banned. Now, this is an unusual thing on the Tom Woods Show.
I feel like a failure.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on here, but it's an important topic. And the thing is, maybe I look at it a little bit differently from a lot of people who will look at Overpoliced. I mean, a lot of people will say they'll look at it from a Black Lives Matter perspective, let's say, but I am inclined to look at it this way, that the police are the enforcement arm of the regime. That's the way I look. That's the way I want my fellow whatever I ams to think about it, not be naive about it, not take a boomer view of the police. These are the people who are going to enforce the lockdowns. They're going to enforce the mandates. And so I know that on some level we need law and order. And I know that in a private law society, of course, we would have police. But the incentives around this particular setup are all bad. And they attract, let's say, not always the best kind of people. And so I think sometimes we might be inclined to say, well, the BLM people are all wrong. So therefore, we got to be careful of that, therefore, because these still might be bad people just for different reasons.
Well, it's a tricky thing because many people like my generation, and to a greater extent, the boomers, like you were saying, they were raised to respect police and things like that. And we're more liberty-minded. We understand that they're going to be the boot that enforces these arbitrary edicts and laws and things like that. And it won't really be about order or peace or security or any of the myths that we're taught, basically as children, about what the police are supposed to be and what they're here for.
I think as long as we have police, we want them to do the job. We want them to protect person and property. And they don't even do that. As a matter of fact, in 2020, they stood down as person and property were destroyed. And now it's become very clear that if somebody says to lock it down, they will help in that. So we're going to have them. They should be working for us. And I guess that's the hard part. I guess we can talk about solutions then.
Yeah, I'll certainly get to that toward the end. But let me put it this way. I know a lot of libertarians who they just can't say enough bad things about the police. And their attitude is that almost no matter what, I'm not calling them. Unless it is some unbelievably unforeseen situation, I'm not calling them because they're going to make things worse. So if it's a domestic dispute, they're going to make things worse. Whatever it is, they're going to make things worse, or you're going to wind up in trouble, even though you're the one who called them. Do you guys take that kind of an approach?
I mean, unless there's a dead body, I feel like I can resolve most situations. I'm having a hard time thinking of a reason why I would call the police. It's just one of those things that libertarians eventually get to be like. It's like, well, they're not going to help, and they might kill a pet or a person. So what am I really doing here?
The last time I called the police, I absolutely had to. My checking account got hacked, and they said you have to file a police report if you want the insurance through the bank to take care of it. And
well, okay, in that case.
And I got a great story about that, and it's real quick, is guy who came to take the report. I'm like, any chance you're going to find out? It's like, no way. Saw the guy 2 weeks later, saw him coming out of the post office. And he's like, he recognized me. We started talking. He's like, oh yeah, that guy lives 2 towns over. I'm like, oh, so you arrested him, right? He's like, no. No, we can't do that.
It's incredible, really. It's incredible. Like, we would never, if a private institution were like this, we would never, ever hear the end of it. Now, it's true, we get plenty of complaints about police, but the alleged solutions that are proposed are generally very lame. I mean, it's funny, for, I don't know, I guess probably at least a solid month or two after George Floyd, we heard demands to, quote, defund the police from the left. All over the place, defund the police. And I thought, well, that's kind of an interesting thing. Maybe they want, I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. I don't know why. I'm trying to think of, what kind of alternatives might they have in mind? They have some kind of community policing model or de-escalation training, maybe, so that people in town can try to resolve disputes. Like, what do they have in mind? And then you would talk to them and they'd say, well, when we say defund the police, we don't actually mean defund the police. I should have known. Of course you don't.
Right.
What do you mean? And it was always some kind of weird social worker response. Well, the police should be trained more to do A and B rather than Y and Z. And I don't know. Whatever it was not defund the police. So don't say it. Does everything out of these people's mouths have to be a lie?
Well, Bruce Benson did mention, he said, like, if you tried defunding the police, it'd be disastrous. And he's correct. Because the hard part is we've got to develop these solutions before we remove the bad solution that we currently have.
Yeah.
Because if you fall, you've got to have something to fall into.
It's like saying, well, anarcho-capitalism didn't immediately develop when such and such state dissolved.
Right.
Well, I wouldn't really expect it to, because you would need the population to be ideologically ready for such a thing. Most people in the world, the vast majority, have never even heard of anarcho-capitalism. So if the state collapses, they just sit around twiddling their thumbs waiting for the next state to take over. So you would need some ideological preparation. Likewise, for the absence of this institution we know of as the police, well, people would have to be ready. They'd have to know that this is not a fated existence, that the police as we know them are only about a century and a half old anyway.
And I think people need to become more familiar with the concept of Chesterton's fence. It's, if we're going to get rid of something, the thing to replace it has to be there. And that includes the state. People want to take this regime down because it's like, we need to get rid of this regime there. So, okay, so what's ready to replace it? And I think that's one place the communists, the tankies got it right. They were like, well, we just can't get rid of this because the same people who own it are just going to buy it right back up. And there has to be a plan.
Right. I don't want to give the impression, based on how I open this episode, that I don't think that some of the complaints that even people on the left might have about the police are completely without merit. I think there is some merit to some of the complaints. And I think it is true that it's kind of an old boys network. I think there's a reason to believe that they conspire to lie or to withhold evidence of what really happened in case after case. I think police unions are probably bad institutions that want to encourage bad things and discourage genuinely salutary reform. So I do understand why some people say, I don't trust the police, because if there is an altercation, their version of events is going to be different from what actually happened in at least some cases.
That's correct. In fact, Norm Stamper, he agrees with you about the unions. He's one of the few former police chiefs of a major city that has a really negative opinion about police unions. But also the section about police victims, where we had Mercer Barrera and Ms. Navarez and the Moraleses discussing their loved ones being killed by police and the ensuing cover-ups. It was just a pattern. The three of them were like, yeah, they all behave the same way. And when we join these support groups online, we see that seems to happen everywhere. It's really the closest thing to a systemic issue you can point to. And so, no matter what, people who are legally allowed to get away with crimes, if they're convincing liars, can pretty much do what they want. And that's a very difficult pill for a lot of people to swallow.
I had a history teacher in high school who was a former police officer. And he admitted to me that he lied on the stand. I mean, that was my upbringing, learning about police, learning about the NYPD.
Yeah.
They conspire, they seek to protect each other. They see themselves as a brotherhood. Really, they see themselves as a gang, not unlike many of the street gangs. I mean, you even see them getting matching tattoos, things like that.
Oh, yeah.
I just want, if they're going to exist, and they're going to exist for a while, for a long time, probably, they need to work for us. And they don't even think they do. So if their attitude is that they don't work for us, then that probably means that they look upon us with suspicion or as even the enemy.
Yeah, with contempt, for sure.
In the film, there's a remark by an economist. Maybe it was Bruce Benson. I think I missed when he was identified, but it looked like Bruce Benson.
Which remark?
Well, first of all, was Bruce Benson interviewed in the?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I'm just making sure that's the guy. But he said something about, as an economist, I'm interested in incentives.
Yeah.
And so I want to ask you, what can we learn about what police behavior is likely to be like based on incentives? What incentives are at play here?
Well, let's say you had like a private security option that was like a company rather than, a community patrol or community policing or something. You would have a private organization, which traditionally tends to have more accountability measures than governments, especially for roles like police. That person who harmed a person is going to cause the company he works for to have to pay out a large settlement if he unjustly harms somebody. And most companies will not keep people like that around. And eventually a culture will develop. And that's one of the biggest problems, is that you cannot have a break in police culture unless you just say, like, all right, we're firing all policemen and we're just starting over and we're going to rebuild this from the ground up. I mean, that's never going to happen either. It's one of those very tricky things where you really don't even know where to start over if you're going to try to start over.
Also, incentives really get distorted when somebody has a government job. And we know how impossible it is for people to get fired from government jobs or to really be punished. Pat Watson talks about when you see people working patrol, it's usually somebody who's new and they're inexperienced, or it's somebody who's older who's been busted down to the street. So let's talk about incentives. If you can't get fired, but what they can do is upset you and get you really peed off. What does that do to a person's incentives? It has a tendency to make it be like, okay, somebody needs to pay for this.
Right. It's like Alex Salazar's one of his former partners who he describes as a serial killer. He's killed 8 people. And you got to wonder, how many cities could a cop like that still stay employed? Even if it was just like, well, it looks like it was a good shooting the other 7 times, not this one. It seems like something that would be a red flag to most departments.
And I think, including Alex Salazar, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, I think he was part of that whole Rampart scandal in LA.
He was. He knew all those people.
Yeah. I mean, this was basically a hit squad, a squad that would do hits, a squad that would rob drug dealers. That's the worst of the worst that you could probably think of. But still, I mean, it happened in a major city. And how many people went to jail for that?
The only one I ever hear about is the guy who they wrote Training Day about.
Yeah.
That Ramirez, I forget, I'm not sure. But anyway, there's another series called We Own the City, which came out, I think, this year or a few months before. And it's fascinating. It's about the Baltimore gun trace squad. And it's a very similar situation. People realize they can do whatever they want to, and they did. And, until eventually, someone gets caught. And of course, somebody talks and they all go away, or some of them go away.
There is actually a pretty important point that Ludwig von Mises makes that's quite relevant and quite eye-opening when applied to the situation of the police. And that has to do with economic calculation, his point about socialism. And that point about socialism applies to all public institutions, as far as I can see, that you're not operating in a profit and loss environment. In a profit and loss environment, the desire to achieve profit and avoid loss, and guided by a price system, make sure that you deploy your resources in the most value productive way. But if it's not a profit and loss system, if you're going to get your revenue, and also people are coercively required to hand over their dough to you, well, that's not a free system. It's not profit and loss. You don't have to make a quote unquote profit. And if all you do is destroy resources all day long, that doesn't matter because you're being subsidized anyway. Well, that's going to have a very profound effect on how you deploy those resources. So maybe if communities were paying you, or they were through insurance companies or whatever, however they finance it, people would presumably pay for security services, or they would pay for you to chase down the perpetrator of that crime. But that's hard work. So if you don't strictly have to do those things, because you're not really dealing with paying customers, and no matter how angry they get, nothing really changes, well, why wouldn't you just sit back and do something that's much easier? Put everybody on the highway and actually collect revenue. It actually costs revenue to go chase that thief.
Yep.
But I can sit here on the highway all day and stop people for going 10 miles over the speed limit. And so, of course, we should expect, given what Mises says, we should expect that that's going to be where the resources are deployed. Or if there's civil asset forfeiture and the department can keep the resources, well, what kinds of things do you think they're going to wind up doing?
Exactly. That's why the drug war was so popular amongst all types of police departments, whether it be federal, state, or local.
Well, yeah, and also pricing comes into this. If you consider the starting salary of police officers and how they're promoted pricing, I mean, it's static. There is no, what do you expect out of somebody when, can you imagine if, okay, so you get one demerit on the job, you lose $5,000 a year or something.
Wow.
Here's where we start. You do this. I think pricing comes into this too, and civil asset forfeiture also comes into this. Talk about incentives. The incentives of, okay, if we just concentrate on drug crimes, we can take people's cars, we can take people's money, we can take people's property, and we can use it or we can sell it, and we get to keep it and we get to use it as we wish.
And you get to look like heroes.
Yeah. Oh, this person had their stuff taken away because of a drug crime. And there have been instances where all it was the parents of the alleged drug dealer who he stayed at their house a couple nights. So
Right.
Now their property has become part of this nexus of drug activity. It's insanity. It's a cabal. And it seems like every group that rules over us, from the 202 area code down to the police, are a cabal.
Before I go on, let me say a quick thing that will help a lot of you, and you know who you are. If you are in business and you're getting buried by your competition online, then build your brand, your reputation, and your lead flow with digital marketing by Persist SEO, our great sponsor. If you're a small local business, you're trying to compete against large companies in the service industry, increase your visibility with Persist SEO. Or if you have low or no leads coming in on a consistent basis, well, website search engine and conversion optimization can help move the needle to a more prosperous business model for you. If you're tired of cold calling, use your website as a lead generation engine. If you're not showing up for your services on the search engines, then get found with Persist SEO's expert search engine optimization. All you have to do is call 770-580-3736 or visit them at ineedseo.help for a free website audit and consultation. That's 770-580-3736 or ineedseo.help. All right, so then the issue becomes, what do we do now? And in the film, there seems to be a lot of pessimism about the prospects for genuinely sensible reform. Certainly from the top down, there's just no incentive for that to happen.
Right.
And then the full-blown nuclear option of complete privatization is highly unlikely to occur. So where does that leave us at the end of this documentary?
I really have more faith in things like citizen review boards as long as they have teeth, they have consequences. If it's, say, a 5-person panel and all 5 of them decided that, based on the evidence presented, that this officer acted illegally or violated this person's rights, I think that ought to stick. That ought to be worth something. And once the police realize there is some level of accountability to the public, well, it's 2 things. It's police realizing there's accountability to the public, and also it's basically the public noticing things. Such a review board would be a great way to bring about a lot of things that are basically hidden or swept under the rug, covered up, or people don't report it because they know that nothing's going to happen.
I'll give you my pessimism and my optimism. My pessimism is for big cities. We know that big cities are run by Democrats. They're regime toadies. They're going to run their city like Washington, D.C. runs itself. My answer to all of this is hyper-localization. If you're in a small town, you can get to know the sheriff. The chief of police probably went to high school with a lot of the people in town. They can be held accountable. The smaller it is, the better it is. And I've been screaming this from the rooftops. Anyone who's living in a big city needs to really get out if you can. Do everything you can to get out. Get your income to be mobile so you can do something like that. I go back to the John Birch Society. The sheriff is the most important elected office in the land. I mean, they can make and break your freedom. If they decide that they're not going to, say, the CDC goes absolutely tyrannical and they want to start force vaccinating people, the sheriff can go, you're not getting our help. You're not coming into this town. No way, no how. At this point, in the system that we have, that's really the only thing that I see that can actually work in the short term before we can fix this. But who knows when this thing can get fixed.
Well, it looks like in places like San Francisco, they're introducing measures like making certain levels of shoplifting, either they're not criminalizing it or they're not going to do anything about it, or it's okay to defecate in public now, stuff like that. I mean, I can hardly imagine that there could be any motivation behind that other than just, maybe I'm just not empathetic enough with people to be able to figure out what the hell motivates them. But it
demoralization. They're demoralized.
I was going to say, is it just to crush people's spirits? Because no normal person would advocate anything like that.
No, it's to take away our hope. And what it is, it's just this circle where they take away our hope, everything goes to crap, and then we have to run back to them because they're the only ones who are authorized to answer any of these problems. The free market isn't allowed to, and now as they're crushing the economy even more, who can afford to hire, even a whole neighborhood might have trouble hiring just one security company to send one person out to patrol on 3 8-hour shifts, 24 hours a day. So I guess that's a black pill, a big black pill, but it's just something that we're going to have to figure a way around.
Yeesh. Wow. This is pretty big downer episode here.
Well, the movie's called Overpoliced.
Well, Pat Watson, who was former Coast Guard, guy was in the Coast Guard, ended up fighting Somali pirates. Think about that. Okay.
Wow.
Then he was a police officer. And I've had him on my show many times to talk about policing. And we just basically talk about the whole philosophy behind it and basically how it works and incentives. And he says, when it comes to these, especially these big city departments, there's no way to reform them. Absolutely no way to reform them. If you break down one barrier to them being able to actually protect and to serve or to be actual peace officers, there's something else there that's going to get in the way of them doing that. This is a guy who wrote a book, F Bureaucracy. That's the title of it. I mean, he saw it from being in the military. And like I said, supposed to be protecting the shores of the United States. And he's fighting Somali pirates and then coming home and seeing what policing is and seeing what working with side by side with drug enforcement agents. And he's like, this can't be fixed.
It's a very valuable documentary because it's got such a useful variety of people in it. Because, of course, we have Bruce Benson, who's an economist. So he's thinking like and also Tate Fegley is in it.
Right.
Who's done some really good work on the police too, and kind of coming at it from an economic standpoint. But then also you have people who have quite compelling testimonies from their own personal lives of having lost a loved one at the hands of the police and the various stories that they've been told about exactly what happened and how it happened and what the rights and wrongs of it were. And they know these stories are false, but that's what the official sources are telling them. Do you just track these people down and invited them to come on?
It was a very, very long process. Jason Basler of the Free Thought Project and Policing the Police, I think you've had him on. He was really helpful. He was one of the people I interviewed, of course. He is in contact with a lot of these organizations and goes to a lot of these events and, emails and social media, stuff like that. He got us the interview with women that we talked to in that home, and he's been really helpful. Always asking, like, is there anything else I can do? And he's going to help bring awareness to the film, things like that. That was kind of tricky because there's basically 5 parts to the film. The first part is how we got the police here in America. And then the second part is what it's like to be a cop. And then what it's like to lose someone or to be hassled by the cops, to be on the other side of it, and then these solutions to these problems. And really, like the history part that was initially two parts that we kind of crammed into one big one.
Yeah, that history part's quite interesting because, again, it helps people to realize that this institution and this way of doing things that we take for granted as inevitable is actually quite a recent innovation.
Right.
And so that can, for the right kind of person, liberate his mind and open it up to other ways, other possibilities. And obviously, in the vast majority of human history, people didn't operate like this. So maybe this is not a fated existence.
Well, it's all like state education. People think that's been around forever, and not necessarily. And particularly in America, there's so many of these things they're new enough that we should still be able to influence people that, hey, maybe there's a better way to do this. Even if it starts with some tiny change, like whether it's a review board that tries to keep a small department in line. Then again, the places that need it the most are going to be places like cities, like Pete was talking about. And that's the biggest challenge because there's so many interlocking things there. You've got bigger unions, you've got much more labor problems. Like just imagine if they fired all the police and then they had somebody have like a sympathy strike. I mean, it may not happen because not all unions like police unions, but it's a possibility.
I think the great importance of this, and this is something that we talked about when we were coming up with the concept for it, was our first documentary we knew that libertarians and anarcho-capitalists were going to like it. And we've even had some people, left libertarians and ANCOMs say they appreciated the way we handled the history, especially.
Yeah.
Right.
Giving credit to the left. But this, we said right from the start, we wanted this to be directed at a Netflix audience. And that's what was important to us, was it's not pointed directly at libertarians. It's not pointed at the right wing. It's not even pointed at the left wing. It's telling the story of how the cops came into existence, exactly what they do, how they do it, and showing some of the devastating consequences of having a police force out there that doesn't work for the people. I had Scott Greer on recently, and I consider Scott Greer, a lot of his thought to be sound, but he was defending the police. And the reason he was defending the police is because of 2020. He looks and he's like, okay, if I'm against the police, then I'm standing side by side with those people who were rioting in the streets in 2020. And I'm looking at it as the reason I don't stand with the police is the police weren't out there stopping that rioting. They were told to stand down and they did. And it's like, come on, man.
But also that's the same kind of reasoning that says that if you don't support the Iraq war, then you're, quote, standing with Saddam Hussein. How about I don't have anything to do with any of this? Isn't that an option?
Yeah.
Actually, these riots we keep referencing, that was what clinched it for when we decided what movie do we want to do next. Because I was trying to convince the guys, Pete and Robert, that maybe we should do something about the military because there's like 3 or 4 different movies I'd like to make about the military. But then we looked on the news and saw like burning police stations and things. I was like, that's kind of interesting too. I never thought I'd see that in my lifetime.
Right. Well, how do people watch it?
You can go to overpolicedfilm.com and it should have a link to get you to Vimeo, or you can just go to vimeo.com/overpoliced. You can watch it that way. You can see the trailer first to find out if you want to watch it or not. Really good trailer. A guy named Cody Smith. He also did our opening title sequences for both films and the trailers for both films. He did a great job with that one. I keep getting compliments on it.
All right, excellent. So I'll put that up on the show notes page, also tomwoods.com/2255, and urge people to check it out. So thank you, gentlemen, very much for this and for our conversation.
It was great to talk to you.
Thank you, Tom.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit tomwoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.